So we're moving on now into the New Testament, away from the psalm, the love song that was written for the Psalm 45, and the Song of Solomon, which is also a love story about God's call to Israel, Christ as the bridegroom and Israel as the bride. And now we're into James and chapter 1 verse 17. James chapter 1 verse 17. And this is where I'll probably spend most of my time this morning. So this is obviously about the whole controversy that goes on in the church. The whole controversy in the church about justified through faith, and yet the whole concept of earning your salvation through works. And that was always the conflict, has been since the Reformation. You have, since Martin Luther nailed his thesis to the door, and said, we're justified by faith. But then other people came back and said, no, we're justified by works. No, we're justified by faith. No, we're justified by works. No, we're justified by faith. No, this is the argument that's gone on down through the ages and gets a bit wearing, really. It's a bit tedious because you need to integrate the two. And of course, convergence does that so well. This is where we get a balance. This is where we're looking for a balance. And so therefore, we are justified through faith, but faith without works is dead faith. So you have to have the both. Faith is what calls us to works. If there's no works, then is there any faith? Unlikely. And that's really what James is talking about here. So it says in verse 17, chapter 1 of James, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. Who's the Father of lights? The Father of lights is God himself. God is spirit and lives in unapproachable light. He's the Father of lights. He spoke and said, let there be light, and there was light. And so he is the Father of lights. And it says, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Now, you listen to the terminology of that, because that's really important. One of the things that's very, very important to the Christian is that God is unchanging. God is not bipolar. God is not kind of schizophrenic and all out there. He's like a schizophrenic spider who has a web that's all bitty. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And it says there is no variation. No variation with God. God doesn't play mind games with us. People sometimes play mind games, but God doesn't play mind games. And so we have to realise that we have a God who is unchanging. We have a God who we can rely on. You see, it's people that change. And many of us change. And that's one of the problems that we have. That we often go through phases in our lives. Well, I don't think we often do. We do. It's just a fact. We go through phases. We go through brain development. We go through childhood development. We go through relationship development. We go through the changes in having children quite often. And then we go forward for changes where we begin to realise our mortality when we get into our midlife, and sometimes we have a midlife crisis, and then we get through that, and it doesn't look very bleak because it's all kind of downhill. We're starting looking over the hill now, and it's like, oh goodness, pensions, retirements, and no, freedom from kids. Well, we've got grandchildren now, and so it goes on. And life is a series of it changes as we go through, and God, all the way through that, does not change. Isn't that wonderful? That even though our life changes so much and so many things happen, God doesn't change. And the wonderful thing is, you are not the same person today as you were yesterday. And you won't be the same person tomorrow that you are today, because your interactions with other people, and life has moved on a few more hours and a few more minutes, and you have learned something else, you have made a decision in your heart to do something. You can be totally different from one minute to the next, just by an attitude of mind. That's what this is about today. It's a call on your heart. It's a call on your life. As Christians, you are supposedly Christian people, and there is a call on your life that Christ is calling you to. And the very moment that the bridegroom appears, leaping on the hills, the moment that stag calls out and the doe responds, life changes. Something happens, you know, and that is the same with us. We can be transformed in a moment. That's why quite often people remember so clearly the time when God called them, when God put that inner call on their life, and there was a moment. There would be a moment in time, and that moment might be right now. That moment might be right this minute, when God puts a call on your life. Christ comes to you, and Christ calls you out, and he says, arise, come away with me. Arise out of the world and come away with me. Incline your heart to mine. Leave the world and this life that you've had and start a new life today. That's the call that is coming from Christ to each and every believer. He doesn't call us for nothing. He didn't give up his life and die a cruel death just for us to sit in a church and say, oh, that's wonderful, thank you, God. He called us. He calls for a change of heart in our lives. He called for something to be different. He calls us to a new life because there is a new purpose to our lives. So he calls us individually. He calls us.